Is Russia making a last-ditch effort to stop Ukraine's counteroffensive before it even begins? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's April 29th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, I want to take a look at the control map. There actually hasn't been any updates. This is the one we talked about yesterday, just the changes in Bakhmut. But what's also interesting, and when we look at the combat map, you can see Russian forces launching just 48 offensive actions in the last 24 hours. This is a very, very low number. I think there was one other day we saw in the 30s. But as you can see, it's kind of across the front lines and actually isn't that concentrated in the areas where Russian forces have been focusing, namely Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Though to a lesser extent, we're seeing, one offensive action, maybe two, we could consider it in Avdiivka. And the reason I think they're doing this, I think they believe, and I have no evidence one way or the other, but Russia seems to believe that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is imminent. And the reason I say this is because these look like spoiler attacks. And spoiler attacks are a military doctrinal term to basically interrupt the enemy's efforts to prepare or execute offensive actions. A good example would be, let's say you have a tank battalion that's getting ready to attack the enemy, but you quickly, before they can deploy in their combat formations, you strike them with an anti-tank unit. That sort of chaos can really, really delay an offensive action because of the amount of preparations that precede offensive work. So it's possible that while Russia may not have a solid idea of where this is taking place, the reason we're seeing a much broader front of attacks is both spoiling attacks, also what's called fixing the enemy. This is the idea that units in contact have a hard time repositioning themselves. And so they may be launching this broad fronted attack to prevent Ukrainian forces from maneuvering on the battlefield, from being repositioned to support an offensive action like a breakthrough. So again, and this isn't super alarming. This isn't so incredibly different from Russia's usual MO. Again, if it were up to me, and from much of the reporting, Russia, I think, honestly seems to believe sometimes that Zaporizhzhia is the likely site of a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Certainly the terrain favors Ukrainian mechanized style of warfare. The fact that it doesn't abut Russia, the fact that it would involve the liberation of both Melitopol and Mariupol, all sort of, to me, make this the logical choice. But Russia knows this as well. So the fact that I'm not seeing any offensive actions along this front, to me, may indicate that I may be ascribing to Russia too much military and cognitive planning on their part. But here's where things get really interesting. First, according to some news reports that I've actually been able to vet, because this sounds like a little crazy, right, but that's why I have ground news. You can see that there's reporting across the political spectrum, actually, by a number of sources, that U.S. is beginning to deploy radiation sensors to Ukrainian troops. Now, I want to be clear that some of these sources, like Russia Today, is Russian affiliated, and ground news is good about tagging them. Zero Hedge is a low factuality when they report news, and some of these aren't great, right? Here's another Russian affiliated. So I think this is probably hyperbole. There's only one really center leaning source that's reporting on this. And, this is, of course, though they're citing the New York Times itself. But a lot of these sources you could see are, one, Russian state media backed, two, interpreting this in a very hyperbolic way. You can see Zero Hedge. U.S. sends shadow unit of atomic experts to wire Ukraine with nuke blast detecting sensors, right? This is a badly written headline because you noticed how it sounds like if you exclude literally the last two words, it means something totally different, right? It means that the U.S. is, sending like nuclear weapons to Ukraine, something preposterous. Instead, what this is something that every single U.S. Unit has. We had them in a tough box in Afghanistan, and there was no possibility of that. This is just a smart precaution, is to have the ability to detect radiation. And they say, yes, from a nuclear weapon or dirty bomb. It could also be detecting radiation from, say, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, a power plant that is, where Russian forces have been known to dig in, that may be proximate to the front line. And this may be an indicator that the U.S. expects some level of fighting to take place in the general vicinity of Zaporizhzhia or another nuclear power station. And that as a precaution, they are deploying, giving Ukrainian troops the ability to detect radiation to keep themselves safe. Again, not as alarming as some of these sources report it. But you guys know Ground News, they're a great sponsor of the channel. They're easy because I do use them in exactly the way I just showed you. And if you want to support Ground News, the link's in the description. But here's where things get really wild, right? Early yesterday, Russia launched the first major wave of cruise missile strikes against Ukraine in nearly 2 months. And Ukraine shot down, by some reports, I think it was like 21 out of 23 missiles. At least 25 civilians were killed. The attacks, of course, are noteworthy because Russia didn't deploy them against energy infrastructure. That's been historically where Russia has been targeting Ukraine. Obviously, it was part of a campaign to sort of punish Ukrainian citizens by making the winter as brutal as possible. Instead, they think, and Russia actually made this claim themselves, that Russia may have been attempting to intercept Ukrainian reserve units and military supplies recently provided to Ukraine. Of course, Russia, as the UK points out, has a very inefficient targeting process, doesn't really prioritize preventing civilian deaths. But I thought it was really interesting. It's also, this reporting has been confirmed by Institute for the Study of War. Right, Russian forces launched missiles from a Tu-95 aircraft over the Caspian Sea and struck some civilian infrastructure. Right, the Russian MOD said the strike was a missile strike against Ukrainian reserve deployment points, and that it struck all intended targets. This is interesting because it indicates that Russia believes that there is a major troop movement, a troop movement so major they were willing to use their very limited supply of missiles to interrupt this movement of troops and material through Ukraine. So they believe that literally at least a very significant number of troops is passing through some of these areas. And so what that says to me is that they believe that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is moving into position, right? And I'm sort of curious. Let's just take a look at where Uman-Chersky Oblast is. We should be able to search for it here, and I'm just sort of curious if that can give us any insight. All right, so this is not actually that good an insight. You could see moving through here. This could be deployed anywhere along the front lines. Not exactly that helpful. Dnipro City, right? And of course, one in Kiev Oblast that you can imagine. Okay, this says literally there is no Dnipro City. Let's see if there's a Dnipro there's one city called Dnipro. Same region. So again, this doesn't really tell us where they're going, which is interesting because it may also indicate that Russia may not have a great idea as to where these guys are headed, since if they knew where they were going, they may wait to hit them until they're in position instead of while they're in transit. But again, if they are concentrated in these areas, it may make the most sense for Russia to try to hit these reserve forces before they deploy to different locations along the front lines. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for today. Of course, you guys know that if you want access to check out the news stories that I can't get to here, you want to check out combatvetnews.com. This is my website. That I launched when Patreon decided they were tired of me. You can see I have all my YouTube videos for free, but if you want to support what I do, become a member. Any one of these membership tiers will get you access to the members only content. We just dropped a video yesterday showing absolutely some of the craziest trench clearing videos I've ever seen. GoPro footage of trench warfare that's absolutely wild, like something out of World War I. So if you want to check that out and get all the uncensored combat videos that I can't show you on YouTube, become a member at combatvetnews.com. Thanks again. Oh, and of course, thanks to all our members, right? I almost forgot. I updated all of our members. Somewhere here is the updated list. I do owe you guys that. Okay. Well, thanks so much to our members. Oh, here we go. Of combatvetnews.com. Finally updated the list here. I appreciate all of our colonel tier members and all of our lieutenant tier members. You guys are the ones who really make this whole thing possible. I really appreciate you, and I will see you all in the next one.